Have you ever wondered if your life has been overshadowed by someone else's story? Ishmael, the firstborn son of Abraham, lived a life shaped by this question. Overshadowed by Isaac, the child of God's covenant, Ishmael often appears as a footnote in the Bible. But his story is far from insignificant. It is a tale of God's faithfulness, his ability to transform rejection into purpose, and his unwavering love for those who feel forgotten. Ishmael's journey begins with human impatience, a decision to take matters into their own hands rather than wait for God's perfect timing. Yet, even in the midst of this imperfection, God's promises to Ishmael were remarkable. He was blessed to become the father of nations, a testament to the fact that no one is left out of God's plan. What does Ishmael's story teach us about grace, purpose, and the vast reach of God's promises? It holds answers for anyone who has ever felt displaced, overlooked, or uncertain about their place in the world. In this exploration of Ishmael's life, we'll uncover lessons about trusting God's timing, finding hope in the wilderness, and recognizing that God's blessings extend beyond human expectations. His story reminds us of a profound truth: no one is forgotten in God's eyes. Join us as we delve into the life of Ishmael and discover how his story reflects the faithfulness of a God who never abandons his children. From the very beginning, the story of Ishmael teaches us a profound lesson: what happens when we try to help God fulfill his promises. Abraham and Sarah, advanced in age, had received an almost unbelievable promise from God. They would have a child who would become the father of a great nation. But as time dragged on and the promise seemed delayed, Sarah's faith wavered. Who could blame her? Waiting is one of the hardest challenges for the human heart. In her doubt and desire to take control, Sarah suggested that Abraham have a child with her Egyptian servant, Hagar, and so Ishmael was born. A child conceived not through the direct fulfillment of God's promise, but through human effort to bring about God's plan. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you tried to help God? Sometimes, anxiety can drive us to act outside of God's perfect will. Despite the circumstances of his birth, Ishmael was deeply loved by Abraham. He represented the long-awaited dream of fatherhood for a man who had waited decades for an heir. Yet even in the joy of Ishmael's birth, there was an underlying tension. Sarah quickly realized that by bringing Hagar into the situation, she had introduced a dynamic that would create deep conflict within their household. Ishmael grew up in the midst of this tension, a child caught between human effort and God's perfect plan. How often do we find ourselves in the same place? We strive to bring about blessings through our own strength, only to create situations that only God can resolve. The birth of Ishmael reminds us that God is patient with us, even in our mistakes. He did not abandon Abraham, Sarah, or Hagar because of their choices. Instead, he continued to work in their lives, showing that his grace is greater than our errors. This gives us hope. Even when we falter, God does not give up on his promises. Ishmael was a living testament that God can transform even the outcomes of our hasty decisions into something meaningful. His story challenges us to reflect. Are we fully trusting God, or are we trying to rush his plans? God doesn't need our help to fulfill his promises, but he invites us to trust in his perfect timing. As we reflect on the birth of Ishmael, we're reminded of the importance of patience and faith in our lives. Instead of rushing ahead, we can rest in the assurance that God is faithful. The story of Ishmael isn't just about human effort, but about how God redeems our choices and guides us back to his will. Ishmael's story is deeply intertwined with God's covenant with Abraham. While Ishmael was not the child of promise, he was still part of God's unfolding plan. When God told Abraham that he would bless him with descendants as numerous as the stars, the promise seemed impossible. Yet God's covenant wasn't just about a single son. It was about a legacy that would bless the nations. Abraham cherished Ishmael, and he undoubtedly believed that his firstborn would carry the covenant forward. Imagine Abraham's heart as he pleaded with God, saying, "If only Ishmael might live under your blessing," Genesis 17:18. This moment reveals Abraham's humanity, a father's love intertwined with a desire to see his son included in God's grand plan. Have you ever prayed for God to fulfill a promise in a way that made sense to you, only to find his plans far exceeded your imagination? God's response to Abraham was profound. He reaffirmed that Sarah would bear the promised son, Isaac, but he also promised to bless Ishmael abundantly. "I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation." Genesis 17:20. This declaration shows God's faithfulness even to those born outside of his initial covenant plan. Despite being a product of human effort, Ishmael was not forgotten by God. This reminds us that God's blessings are not confined by human mistakes or limitations. He is a God of abundance who often gives more than we deserve. Ishmael's life proves that God's love extends beyond our expectations, and his plans always include room for grace. For Ishmael, this promise of blessing was a beacon of hope. Although he would not inherit the covenant blessings reserved for Isaac, he was still set apart for greatness. This is a powerful reminder for us today. Even when we feel sidelined or forgotten, God sees us. His plans for our lives are significant, and his blessings reach every corner of our existence. The covenant was a demonstration of God's unwavering commitment to his promises. Abraham's faith, though imperfect, was honored, and both Ishmael and Isaac became part of the divine story. God's faithfulness reminds us that he doesn't forget anyone, no matter the circumstances of their birth or the path they've walked. Through Ishmael's blessing, we see that God's promises are not limited to one person or one group. They overflow, touching lives in unexpected ways. His covenant reminds us to trust in his plans, even when they seem beyond our understanding. Hagar's story is one of resilience, courage, and God's provision in the face of rejection. As the mother of Ishmael, she endured hardships that few could bear. When tension between Sarah and Hagar became unbearable, Hagar fled into the wilderness. Imagine her desperation, a single mother abandoned and alone, with no clear path forward. Yet it was in this wilderness that Hagar encountered God in a profound way. The Bible tells us that the angel of the Lord appeared to Hagar by a spring of water. He spoke words of comfort and direction, calling her by name and acknowledging her pain. "Hagar, servant of Sarah, where have you come from and where are you going?" Genesis 16:8. These words weren't just a question, they were an invitation for Hagar to reflect and to trust in the God who saw her plight. In this divine encounter, God revealed a promise to Hagar. Ishmael would become the father of a great nation. This assurance transformed her despair into hope. Have you ever felt like you were wandering in a wilderness of uncertainty, unsure of what the future held? Hagar's story reminds us that God meets us in our darkest moments and speaks life into our circumstances. Hagar called God by a name that resonates with all of us who have felt unseen or forgotten: El Roi, the God who sees me. In that moment, she recognized that she was not invisible to God, and neither was her son. This truth is a powerful reminder that no matter how isolated we feel, God's eyes are always upon us. He sees our struggles, hears our cries, and provides for our needs. Later, when Hagar and Ishmael were cast out into the wilderness once more, God's provision appeared in a tangible way. As their water ran out, Hagar wept, believing that death was near. But God heard Ishmael's cries and opened Hagar's eyes to see a well of water, Genesis 21:19. In that moment, he proved once again that his promises never fail. Hagar's journey is a testament to the strength God gives to those who trust him. She endured rejection, hardship, and fear, yet she found purpose and hope in God's faithfulness. Her story challenges us to look for God's hand, even in the wildernesses of our lives. If this message has touched your heart, share your thoughts or experiences in the comments. Let us know how God has shown himself faithful in your times of need. or simply comment the word strength to let us know you're walking with us on this spiritual journey. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more uplifting content. Ishmael's life was shaped by rejection, a reality that began even before his birth. As the son of Hagar, the servant of Sarah, Ishmael was born into a complicated family dynamic. Though Abraham loved him deeply, the tension between Sarah and Hagar placed Ishmael in a difficult position. How often do we see ourselves or others caught in the consequences of choices made by those before us? When Isaac, the promised son, was born, the relationship between Ishmael and Sarah reached a breaking point. Ishmael's playful behavior with Isaac became a source of contention, leading Sarah to demand that Hagar and Ishmael be sent away. Imagine Ishmael's confusion and pain as he was cast out from the home where he had grown up. For a child to experience rejection, especially from family, is a wound that runs deep. Yet even in this moment of rejection, God's hand was on Ishmael's life. As he and Hagar wandered in the wilderness, God appeared to them, reaffirming his promise to make Ishmael into a great nation. This divine reassurance reminds us that rejection by people does not mean rejection by God. Have you ever felt pushed aside or forgotten? Ishmael's story shows us that God's plans for us are never cancelled by human actions. Rejection can lead to bitterness, but it can also lead to strength and resilience. Ishmael's struggles prepared him for the role he would later play as the father of a nation. His experiences in the wilderness taught him to rely on God's provision and to endure challenges with courage. In the same way, our struggles often shape us into the people God is calling us to be. God's faithfulness to Ishmael demonstrates his ability to work through even the most painful circumstances. Though Ishmael's life began with conflict and rejection, his legacy was marked by strength and fulfillment of God's promises. This is a powerful reminder that God's plans for our lives are greater than the opinions or actions of others. When we feel rejected, we can turn to the God who sees us and calls us by name. Just as he cared for Ishmael and Hagar in their darkest moments, he cares for us in ours. His love is constant, and his plans for us are full of hope and purpose. Although Ishmael's story begins with tension and rejection, it is ultimately a testament to God's faithfulness. God promised to bless Ishmael, and that blessing was not dependent on the circumstances of his birth or the mistakes of others. Ishmael's life reminds us that God's plans are not thwarted by human limitations or failures. After Abraham pleaded with God to bless Ishmael, God reassured him that Ishmael would not be forgotten. "I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation." Genesis 17:20. This was no small promise. God was declaring a future of abundance and significance for Ishmael, proving that his blessings extend far beyond human expectations. Ishmael's descendants, known as the Ishmaelites, became a prominent people. Throughout history, they played important roles in trade and culture, fulfilling God's promise to make him into a great nation. Have you ever considered how God's blessings in your life might ripple out to impact generations to come? Ishmael's story reminds us that God's blessings often reach far beyond what we can see. The blessing on Ishmael also serves as a reminder of God's impartiality. While Isaac was the child of the covenant, Ishmael was not forgotten or overlooked. God's grace is not limited to a select few. It is vast and inclusive, reaching every person who calls upon him. This truth is a source of comfort for all who feel marginalized or unseen. Ishmael's legacy as the father of nations reveals that God can bring greatness out of any situation. What others may see as a mistake, God can transform into a blessing. His promises to Ishmael are a reflection of his character. A God who keeps his word, honors his commitments, and blesses abundantly. As we reflect on Ishmael's blessing, we are reminded that God's plans for us are always good. Even when life seems uncertain or we feel unworthy, God's love and provision remain steadfast. His blessings are not limited by our past or our failures. Instead, they are rooted in His unchanging faithfulness. The story of Ishmael and his family is a profound lesson in patience and trust. Abraham and Sarah's decision to bring Hagar into their plan for a child arose from impatience with God's timing. They had received a divine promise, but as years passed without fulfillment, they took matters into their own hands. How often do we fall into the same trap, trying to accelerate God's plans when the wait feels unbearable? Waiting is one of the greatest challenges of faith. For Abraham and Sarah, the wait tested their trust in God's promise. Yet, their impatience brought complications not only to their own lives, but also to Hagar and Ishmael. This reminds us that our choices in moments of impatience can ripple out, affecting others in ways we may not anticipate. Despite their impatience, God's faithfulness remained unwavering. He fulfilled His promise to Sarah by giving her Isaac, the child of the covenant. At the same time, He honored His commitment to bless Ishmael, showing that He does not abandon us, even when we falter. Have you ever seen God's grace in your life, despite moments when your faith wavered? These instances remind us of His steadfast love. Patience is not merely about waiting, it is about trusting in God's timing and surrendering our need for control. Abraham and Sarah's story teaches us that God's timing is always perfect, even when it feels delayed. While Ishmael was born out of human effort, Isaac was born as the fulfillment of a divine promise, a reminder that God's plans are far better than anything we could orchestrate on our own. When we try to rush God's plans, we often find ourselves facing unintended challenges. Yet God's grace can transform even our missteps into opportunities for growth and redemption. Ishmael's life is proof that God works through all circumstances, weaving even our impatience into His greater purpose. The lesson of patience is one that echoes through the generations. It calls us to trust in the unseen, to wait with hope, and to believe that God's promises will come to pass. Though the wait may be difficult, it is always worth it, for God's plans are filled with goodness and purpose. The relationship between Ishmael and Isaac highlights the tension that often arises when human effort and divine promise intersect. Though they were brothers, born to the same father, their lives were shaped by vastly different circumstances. Ishmael, the firstborn, came into the world through Sarah's impatience, while Isaac was the fulfillment of God's covenant with Abraham and Sarah. This dynamic set the stage for rivalry, misunderstanding, and eventual separation. When Isaac was born, the joy in Abraham's household was palpable. But this joy was not shared by everyone. Ishmael, a teenager at the time, found himself in an increasingly precarious position. The Bible recounts a moment when Sarah saw Ishmael mocking Isaac during a celebration, which led to Sarah demanding that Hagar and Ishmael be sent away. Genesis 21:8-10. This act of separation was devastating for Abraham, but God assured him that He had a plan for Ishmael too. Sibling rivalry is a theme many can relate to, whether in family dynamics or other areas of life. Ishmael and Isaac's story serves as a reminder of how jealousy, competition, and misunderstandings can arise even among those who should share a bond of love. Have you ever found yourself comparing your life to someone else's, feeling overlooked or less valued? Ishmael's experience reflects the pain of feeling displaced, yet his story also shows us that God's blessings are not limited. Despite the separation, both Ishmael and Isaac were part of God's divine plan. Isaac would carry the covenant promise, but Ishmael was not forgotten. God's blessing on Ishmael to make him the father of a great nation was a testament to His fairness and generosity. This reveals a profound truth. God's love and purpose extend to everyone, even when life's circumstances seem to favor one over another. The story of Ishmael and Isaac challenges us to overcome the spirit of rivalry and embrace the unique paths God has for each of us. Instead of competing or comparing, we can rest in the assurance that God has a purpose for our lives that is just as significant as anyone else's. Ishmael's life reminds us that there is no need to strive for recognition or approval when we are already seen and valued by God. Ultimately, the legacy of both Ishmael and Isaac fulfilled God's promise to Abraham. Their descendants shaped history in ways that still resonate today. This enduring impact serves as a reminder that God's plans are far greater than we can comprehend, and His blessings are abundant enough for all. One of the most striking moments in Ishmael's story occurs in the wilderness, where he and his mother Hagar face what seems to be the end of their journey. After being cast out from Abraham's household, they wander in the desert with limited resources. When their water runs out, Hagar, overwhelmed by despair, places Ishmael under a bush and moves away, unable to watch her son die. Genesis 21:15-16. It's a scene of heartbreak that many can empathize with, feeling helpless in the face of life's challenges. Yet, in this moment of desperation, God intervenes. The Bible says, God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven. Genesis 21:17. This divine response is a powerful reminder that God hears our cries, even in our lowest moments. Have you ever felt like you were at the end of your rope, only to discover that God was there, ready to provide exactly what you needed? God opens Hagar's eyes, and she sees a well of water nearby. This well becomes a lifeline, sustaining them and reminding them of God's provision. It's a vivid picture of how God meets us in our deserts, those barren, desolate places where hope feels distant. He provides not just for our immediate needs, but also reassures us of His presence and His promises. The well in the desert symbolizes more than physical provision. It represents hope, renewal, and God's ability to transform our circumstances. Ishmael's life was spared, and God reaffirmed His promise to make him into a great nation. This act of provision was a declaration of God's faithfulness, showing that His promises are not limited by human rejection or circumstances. For Hagar and Ishmael, the wilderness was not the end of their story. It became a place of encounter with God, where they experienced His care in a deeply personal way. In our own lives, the wilderness moments, those times of struggle, loss, or uncertainty, often become the very places where we see God's hand most clearly. This part of Ishmael's story invites us to trust in God's provision, even when we can't see the way forward. Just as He heard Ishmael's cries, He hears ours. And just as He opened Hagar's eyes to see the well, He can open our eyes to see His blessings in unexpected places. Despite the challenges and rejection Ishmael faced, his life culminates in a legacy that reflects God's promise and faithfulness. Ishmael's descendants became a vast and influential people, fulfilling God's words to Abraham. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. Genesis 17:20. This declaration reveals a profound truth. God's blessings endure no matter the circumstances. The Bible records that Ishmael had 12 sons, who became the leaders of 12 tribes. Genesis 25:13-16. These tribes settled in regions that would grow into thriving communities, fulfilling God's promise of making Ishmael's descendants numerous and significant. This legacy was a testament not only to Ishmael's endurance, but also to God's commitment to keep His word. Ishmael's story reminds us that God's plans often extend far beyond our lifetimes. The blessings God pours into our lives can ripple into future generations, impacting people we may never meet. Have you considered the ways your faith and trust in God might influence those who come after you? Ishmael's legacy challenges us to live with a sense of purpose, knowing that God's work in our lives is part of a much bigger picture. While Ishmael's path differed from Isaac's, his role in God's plan was no less significant. His life demonstrates that God's promises are not limited to a select few. They overflow to all who are willing to trust in Him. Ishmael's legacy is a reminder that God values every individual and has a unique purpose for each of us. The enduring impact of Ishmael's descendants also serves as a call to unity. Though Ishmael and Isaac's descendants have often been at odds, they share a common origin and a shared blessing from God. This shared history invites us to seek reconciliation and to view one another through the lens of God's grace and purpose. Ultimately, Ishmael's life and legacy reflect the abundance of God's blessings. He is a God who does not forget or forsake, who transforms rejection into purpose, and who uses all things for his glory. Ishmael's story encourages us to trust that our lives too can leave a legacy that honors God and blesses others. Ishmael's journey is one of complexity, struggle, and ultimately divine purpose. From his birth to his legacy as a father of nations, his life reveals lessons that resonate deeply with all who have faced rejection, waited on God's promises, or questioned their place in his plan. Through Ishmael, we see that God's faithfulness is unchanging and his grace is boundless. One of the most significant lessons from Ishmael's story is the reassurance that God sees us, even when the world overlooks us. Hagar's cry in the wilderness, "You are the God who sees me," Genesis 16:13, reminds us that we are never invisible to God. He is aware of our struggles and hears our prayers, even when they seem to echo unanswered in the desert of life. Ishmael's life also teaches us about God's ability to bring purpose out of pain. Though he experienced rejection and separation, these hardships prepared him for his role as a leader and the father of a great nation. Have you ever faced difficulties that later became stepping stones to something greater? God has a way of using even the most challenging parts of our story to shape us for his purposes. Another key lesson is found in the interplay between human effort and divine promise. Ishmael's birth was a result of human impatience, yet God still blessed him and wove him into his plan. This demonstrates that while our mistakes may cause detours, they do not disqualify us from God's love or his promises. His grace is greater than our shortcomings. Ishmael's story challenges us to trust God's timing, even when it feels delayed. Abraham and Sarah's impatience brought complications, but God's promises to both Isaac and Ishmael were fulfilled in his perfect time. This calls us to wait with faith, knowing that God is always at work, even when we cannot see it. Finally, Ishmael's legacy as a father of nations is a powerful reminder that God's blessings are abundant and inclusive. He does not forget or forsake anyone, and his purposes are far-reaching. Like Ishmael, each of us has a unique role in God's story, and our lives have the potential to leave a lasting impact. As we reflect on Ishmael's journey, let us embrace the truth that no one is forgotten in God's plan. Whether we are waiting on a promise, walking through a wilderness, or building a legacy, we can trust in the God who sees, provides, and fulfills his word. Perfeito, vou prosseguir com a conclusão. Ishmael's story is a powerful reminder that God's plans are never incomplete and his blessings extend to every corner of our lives. Despite the rejection and challenges he faced, Ishmael's journey reveals a God who sees, hears, and provides for those who feel overlooked. His life teaches us that even when we take detours, God's faithfulness and grace remain steadfast. From his birth as a result of human impatience to his role as the father of nations, Ishmael's life reflects the beauty of God's redemptive power. We see how God turns moments of despair into opportunities for blessing, showing us that his promises are not limited by our circumstances or mistakes. Ishmael's legacy as a father of 12 tribes proves that no one is forgotten in God's plan. As you reflect on Ishmael's story, may you find encouragement in knowing that God's purpose for your life is unique and significant. Even in the wilderness moments, when hope seems distant, remember that God is there, ready to provide. He sees you, just as he saw Hagar and Ishmael, and he has blessings prepared for you beyond what you can imagine. Let's close with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Thank you for reminding us through Ishmael's story that your grace and faithfulness reach us wherever we are. Help us trust in your timing, rest in your provision, and embrace the unique purpose you have for our lives. May we always remember that we are seen, loved, and never forgotten by you. Amen. If this message touched your heart, share it with friends and family who may need encouragement today. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications to stay connected with more uplifting and inspiring content from God's Word.